Alright, after a brief Christmas break, I am back to reviewing the second season of The Witcher show on Netflix. If you've missed my videos about the first 2 episodes, you can have a look at the playlist in the description, but now it's time for the third one. Before we begin, let me warn you that this video will likely be full of spoilers, and let's get going. We open up with the wind howling, Ciri has begun her training, and for some reason she keeps dropping her sword. She is still haunted by Kair, and Geralt tells her she is safe here.
You are safe here.
You know, until another Witcher turns into a Leshen, but I guess we've already forgotten about that incident.
What's the difference between a Witcher and a heap of shit?
Well, go on then.
Eventually, the shit will stop smelling.
Also, have you noticed that some Witchers do not have cat eyes? I think this is strange because they specifically showed the eyes of Witchers transforming in the Vesemir Anime, which, as we have established in the previous review, is considered canon for the Netflix show. And it wasn't just Vesemir's eyes either. They showed Geralt, Lambert, Eskel, Remus, I think, and pretty much any other Witcher who appears in the film. And now suddenly, Eskel and Coen don't have them anymore. And if it wasn't for the anime, it wouldn't have been such an issue, since so far, the show hasn't assigned any specific powers to Witcher eyes. They do in fact have superhuman properties in the books, but Netflix could have just implied that Geralt is the only Witcher who has them, and the color is mostly a cosmetic thing, perhaps a result of his excessive mutations, but they made a clear point to show how the eyes change as you become a Witcher in Nightmare of the Wolf, and then immediately ignored that in the next installment. But wait a minute, Geralt has a vision of Eskel, and now he does have Witcher eyes. Maybe the Eskel Doppler theory is true, except a Doppler would be able to change his eye color, and the other Witchers would have certainly grown suspicious if Eskel suddenly shows up without yellow eyes. But yeah, let's move on. Oh, but before we do, who is Sorrel?
Eskel, Sorrel's waiting for us. No.
Sounds like he's either a fellow Witcher or someone who trains them. Now, this vision, if true, seems to have taken place after they were fully trained. So it does sound more like a fellow Witcher who is waiting for them to continue practicing, I think. But please let me know if you have any idea as to who might that be. And now that I mentioned the Vesemir anime, we have a scene that just feels out of place. They're having this conversation about who and what might have mutated the Leshen, and how they can't find any scientific explanation of it, despite all the alchemical compounds they have. Meanwhile, those specific alchemical compounds were precisely at the root of the mutated monsters in the anime. Vesemir himself discovered that, and Geralt was there when a horde of such mutants attacked the fortress, yet both of them are acting as though they have no knowledge about any of this. There isn't even a single mention of those events, despite all the similarities. You know, one of them should have said, "Hey, remember that one time this castle fell to a legion of mutant monsters? I wonder if this mutant monster is somehow related to that." Anyway, we move on to Tissaia, and here we have a nod to the Sodden memorial scene in the books, you know, with all the names, which I still think they should have done at the start of the season, the way it was in the books. And now some of you will comment how I just don't like it because it's not the same. Well, it's not that it's not the same, it's just that it's worse. You know, it's more important to see how the main character, you know, Geralt, deals with the potential loss of Yennefer, as opposed to seeing how Tissaia is doing it, in my opinion. But still, the mages are congregating. Someone appears to have mysteriously placed a magical barrier in Kair's mind, and speaking of that, let's talk about Vilgefortz. They have changed his appearance rather significantly, you know, the clothing and hairstyle, which isn't bad, it kinda suits him. However, he's supposed to be a mage of the north, and he did look like one in the first season, but now he comes across as a foreigner amongst them. Next up, Yennefer is back.
Stregobor is a fuckhead.
We are reminded again that she was the true hero at Sodden. The elves are migrating to Sintra.
Eat meat. Be happy.
And Ciri is about to train on the pendulum, which hits her so hard, I thought she would die or something. But she doesn't even have a scratch on her. We then cut to Vesemir and Geralt feeding Eskel to the wolves. Apparently the rumors were true. Many people doubted that, myself included, but it sort of happens. And it appears to be a kind of ritual, I guess, at Kaer Morhen. I suddenly regret that they don't have any other Witcher schools on Netflix. Imagine the Viper Witchers throwing their dead in a pit of vipers. But jokes aside, there are some good pieces of acting by the man who does Vesemir. It's a shame they didn't have him do some of that immediately after Eskel was killed, but better late than never. Then sadly, they still act like they haven't watched the anime. Mutated monsters are what killed the majority of Witchers at Kaer Morhen. Yet Vesemir sounds like that's something that has never happened.
Death by mutating flesh. Find that in our annals.
Moving back to Yennefer, wearing a rather revealing outfit. Triss appears. They dyed her hair reddish this time, no doubt due to fan feedback. It contrasts with her eyebrows a bit, but she definitely looks better than before. We then have some pretty good looking CGI about Falka, one of the absolute improvements in Season 2, and for a moment there I thought he called her a power-hungry motherfucker.
You know, she was a power-hungry mother of a girl.
Now, later in the books, there are parallels drawn between Falka and Ciri, but here she's actually compared to Yennefer. You know, since Falka is a quarter elf and she did bad things, therefore Yennefer, who is also a quarter elf, will do bad things as well. It might have been cool if they decided that Falka was one of the women cursed with the Black Sun. That's not how it is in the books, but I think it would have given her and Stregobor an even more of a personal connection. Next up, Ciri gets completely destroyed by the pendulum, and she still doesn't have much of a scratch on her, until a bit later that is. These scenes of Ciri training are important, and I'm glad they're spending some time on them, because she will eventually grow to be quite the formidable warrior, and she needs a good reason for being that strong and that proficient. And speaking of good things, we have the improved Nilfgaardian armor on display, which is much appreciated, and Fringilla tells Francesca that Nilfgaard's mission is to feed, house and liberate?
We are looked upon as imperialists, that we are here to destroy the world, but we're not. We are trying to feed, to house, to liberate.
Meanwhile, in Season 1, she said that they're here to spread their supremacy, something like that.
And we will spread his supremacy all through the kingdoms, whether they deserve it or not.
We're back to Yennefer, who doesn't like men.
What's the hurry, my dear?
What is it with men lurking about this place?
And for a good reason, because this man tries to mess with her mind.
Fuck you!
Until Tisai interrupts them and tells him that he will answer to this.
You will answer to this.
Isn't the expression to answer for something? I'll appreciate some feedback from the English people out there, English-speaking people. But anyway, Stregobor and others grow even more suspicious about Yennefer's potential collaboration with Nilfgaard and the elves, and something must be done. The solution is to have Yennefer publicly execute Kair in order to prove she's innocent.
To prove your innocence, you will have to kill the Nilfgaardian prisoner. Is this Vilgefortz talking or you?
And again, in my opinion, things aren't making much sense. First off, how does killing Kair prove that Yennefer is not a spy?
Which will prove what? That you are not a spy! Or that I am a killer!
I think a good spy would happily do it. This way he won't be able to leak any information. But this is not how Yennefer sees it. In fact, she worries that if she kills him, they will only see her as a killer and have another excuse to hate her.
And be gift-wrapping yet another reason for Stregobor to vilify me!
But she did already murder hundreds of Nilfgaardians with supposedly forbidden magic, so it can hardly get much worse. And then, Tisai tells her that there's a third option. Yennefer can instead tell the truth about losing her power, and in doing so, convince the others that she's no threat.
And tell them the truth. What? You are not a threat because you have lost your magic.
But how does losing her power prove that she's not a spy? I don't know. Next up, Geralt finds Ciri's scarf thing suspiciously walled into the ceiling, and it almost looks like there's a Leshen hand reaching for it. She then describes a feeling of being pulled, a pool which seems to originate from the woods nearby, so she goes there with Geralt. He has his new armor and his silver sword, and suddenly the cool mutated Leshen appears. It kind of looks like a female Leshen, so my theory about it laying eggs inside Eskel might be true. But anyway, we see Ciri being able to see the future, essentially, you know, that scene where she's being dragged, which is a neat way of showing it. I like that. Then Geralt does his Igni trick on the sword, which once again looks awesome, but suddenly another monster shows up, which looks like a mixture of 5 others, and it kills the pretty Leshen. Geralt uses Qwen's shield. It doesn't help much. However, the monster isn't interested in him, it chases Ciri instead, and it looks like it's not really trying to kill her, which is also interesting, but then Geralt cuts things short and we're back to the mages. The Sodden Memorial is finally built, and everyone has gathered for Kyr's execution, including the rulers of the north. King Vesemir shows up for the first time, so does Queen Meve. She looks too young, by the way. She does have a child who is older than Ciri, and then we witness what is most likely the least plausible escape ever. Yennefer grabs this massive axe, and instead of executing Kyr, she adeptly swings it in such a way that it only breaks his handcuffs. Then she awkwardly topples the pyres next to her, runs over to a horse somewhere far away, then Kyr shows up out of nowhere, they exchange a few words and they ride off. All this happens without a single person trying to stop them or chase after them. Keep in mind that this is Yennefer without any magical powers, and Kyr who is barely standing on his feet. Yet they are able to run away from the most powerful mages and the rulers of the north. But yeah, nobody lifts a finger to stop them, despite them being a criminal and a supposed spy. They just escape and the episode ends. But it also marks the beginning of Netflix's, let's call it, original story. I suppose technically it started halfway through the previous episode, but from around this point onwards, basically everything that happens is anywhere from mildly to completely different from the books. I obviously won't be going over every single difference, but I will occasionally mention some of them. You know, the ones I think are the most interesting. So that's all for now. Tell me what you thought of all of it, and until the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Special thanks to my supporters and YouTube members. Stay tuned and be good.